Okay, hello, good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are just joining, getting into the room and all that stuff, I hope you guys are having a wonderful evening. And from all of us here on the panel, we just appreciate you all being here. You could be doing other things tonight. I know everybody probably had a great Memorial Day weekend, but we thank you for being here with us. So we're going to go ahead and get some things started. Panelists, are you all ready to chat about this important issue? Okay. Well, first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Renee Summerhour Brown, and I'm honored to host tonight's conversation. It's called Who Gets Heard? A Conversation on Voting Rights, Representation, and Power. So, tonight's discussion, we're going to be talking about politics, of course, but we're going to be talking about more than that. Okay. We're going to be covering who gets represented. We're going to be talking about who gets resources and ultimately who gets heard. So, across the country, we continue to see a growing conversation about redistricting, voting rights, fair representation, and what this decision could mean for communities, especially the Black community. And while these issues can sometimes feel like policy conversations happening far away, the truth is it does impact everyday people, even here in Nevada. And those that are impacted, their voices matter. And we need to know whose neighborhoods get invested in, who's getting protected, who gets left behind, and left out of the process. And so tonight we want to make sure that the conversation is accessible, it's honest, and it's real. So we're going to get into it. Again, thank you for all of you who are joining us tonight. I want to welcome Congressman Steven Horsford, representative for Nevada's 4th Congressional District and former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. We're also welcomed by Blake Paradis, Senior Director and Policy Counsel at the National Urban League, Khalil Thomas with Win with Black Men, and Senator Dina Neal, State Senator for Nevada. I want to thank all of you for being here, as well as our creator voices, Tim Fullerton and Tamika Bryant. So thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And let's get into the conversation. First, we're going to start with remarks from our congressman.
Well, thank you so much, Renee. It's great to see you, and thank you for hosting and moderating today's conversation. And I want to really begin today. There's a lot of news happening even today, and there has been over the course of the last few weeks since the Supreme Court decision. But I want to thank everyone who is joining us from across Nevada tonight. And I also want to recognize the people who are going to make this conversation uh, informative, engaging, and I feel like we'll all walk away knowing that the power is within all of us, even as there's so much chaos happening. So to Blake, thank you for your leadership and tireless advocacy in advancing equity, policy, and opportunity for communities all across this country. I'm really delighted that you're on. Khalil, your organizing abilities, your commitment to uplifting the people around you, and the coalition that you've built speaks volumes. And I'm excited that constituents here in Nevada get to hear more about that work. To my dear friend and colleague, State Senator Dina Neal, I previously served in the district that Senator Neal now represents in the Nevada State Legislature, and you have been just a true partner and leader on behalf of so many of the important issues, including voting rights and equal representation that we're going to talk about today. And this issue is not just about Congress, it's about how it affects state legislatures, local county officials, school board trustees. And so to have your voice in this conversation matters a lot. And I love that we have our creators participating. Tim, Tamika, and Joe, thank you for helping amplify these conversations and making sure that we actually reach people where they are, and to make sure that people feel informed, included, and heard. You're very important to this process. And to every family, worker, student, and community leader who's tuning in tonight, thank you for joining. Your presence matters, and you know how much you mean to me. Because this conversation matters. This is a really important moment. You know, to say that I have been distraught since the Supreme Court decision a few weeks ago is an understatement. We have seen this comprehensive, coordinated, intentional attack on Black power. That's really what this is about. Political and economic power that is now under attack as a result of these decisions unfold. And the rapid speed by which these states have, acted to deny representation, to change um, maps based on partisan basis, and then to dilute the Black vote and the Black voice in the meantime, speaks to the urgency of the moment. And that's why we're here tonight. The situation is developing, and today we saw resistance to these attacks in Alabama and in South Carolina. The case in Alabama will likely be appealed now to the United States Supreme Court. And the decision by the state Senate in South Carolina not to move forward in a redistricting process this cycle, this midterm, I will count those as wins for as long as we're able to count them. So I applaud the lawmakers that, regardless of party lines, are standing for what is right and what is fair in their states and in their communities. In this moment, it's imperative that we organize, because power does not come from outrage, it comes from organizing. We can be mad as we want, but we got to wake up the next day and figure out how to get to work. And that's what this moment requires. This is not a partisan discussion tonight. This is about equal representation. This is about voting rights, which are not just about ballots. They are about power, as I said. Who has a seat at the table and who doesn't, where those decisions get made. And what we're seeing all across this country, especially across the South, should concern every one of us. This is not a problem only for the Congressional Black Caucus. It's not a problem only for Black communities. This is about a direct assault on our democracy itself. So in Louisiana and Alabama and Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and Mississippi, Missouri, we are seeing the voting rights that people fought and bled for be systemically dismantled. And while the South is at the center of the fight right now, it won't stop there, not unless we concede. When maps are manipulated, communities are pushed out of power, and when representation is weakened, so is economic power. I want every one of us to understand this is not just about representation of one person in one district. This is about power, who possesses it, and it's not just about political power, it's about economic power, because that's really what they're afraid of. This is about the say that people have in their own communities. Yes, it's about access to good paying jobs, but it's also about affordable housing and healthcare, quality education for our children, and access to opportunity, things that are the cornerstones of any good democracy. Who sits in power determines whether investments flow or not, which communities are able to grow or not, which businesses get supported or not, and which families have a fair shot at building wealth or not. That is why voting rights are economic rights. They're inextricably linked. And representation is economic power. So many of you joining tonight may be wondering, what does this mean for Nevada? Well, here in the 4th Congressional District, which is one of the largest and most diverse districts in our state, families are working harder every day to make ends meet, to find affordable housing, to get access to good quality health care, and to create opportunity for the next generation. And every Nevadan deserves their voice to be part of that decision. That is why this moment matters. And Nevada knows what happens when communities are overlooked, and we don't want that to happen here. So tonight is about learning, it's about truth setting, it's about an honest conversation, and I hope that it will also turn into a powerful organizing opportunity for what we need to do in the weeks and the months to come. And it's also about making sure that every community has a fair voice and a fair shot, because every Nevadan deserves to be seen, to be represented, and to be heard. And so, as I said, this is not about party or partisanship. This is about the people who have to be at the center of this process. And ultimately, I believe that's really what they're afraid of. Not putting the power in the hands of the very few or the elite, but in the hands of the very people who are closest to the pain when these policies are not advanced in an equitable and fair way. So thank you again, Renee, for moderating. Thank you all for joining us. Let's get into the conversation.
Thank you so much. Blake Paradis, would you like to give your opening remarks?
Absolutely. Thank you, Renee. And thank you, Congressman Horsford, for getting us all together for this really important conversation. As Renee said, my name is Blake Paradis. I am the Senior Director and Policy Counsel for the National Urban League. The National Urban League has been defending democracy and protecting civil rights across its 93 affiliates for the past 115 years. And yet our work feels just as urgent today as it ever has. We have spent the last 2 years responding to attacks from the federal government, from state governments, not to mention federal and state courts that have been trying to take away the vote from Black communities, from women, and from other underrepresented communities of color. As an advocacy organization, we have been rallying our Urban League movement to fight back against voter suppression legislation like the SAVE Act, like the Save America Act, and the MEGA Act, while also engaging on the ground in communities we serve. I was just one of many urban leaguers that helped plan and participate the All Roads Lead to the South activation in Montgomery, Alabama. More than 50 of us traveled from within the state of Alabama, not to mention across Georgia, Kentucky, and North Carolina. And those who couldn't attend in person were hosting or participating in satellite activations across 24 states was the last I heard. This is just a small portion of the work that we are doing to protect voting rights. As we're seeing states, and like the Congressman said, of course, mostly in the South right now, but trying to eliminate majority Black congressional districts, our folks are rallying at state capitals and testifying in opposition to these harmful maps. Last week, our president and CEO, former New Orleans Mayor Marc Morial, testified before the Louisiana state legislature. In his testimony, he recounted visiting the state capitol with his father, Ernest Morial, the first Black representative elected to the Louisiana legislature since Reconstruction. He talked about how every other Black person in the building was either holding a mop, shining shoes, or carrying a tray of water, and that he had hoped his home state had turned the page on this painful history. In a state where 30% of the population is Black, Louisiana has only ever sent 4 Black representatives to Congress. And the legislature appears poised to once again draw Representative Cleo Fields out of his seat. We at the Urban League are clear-eyed about the fight ahead. In addition to our work with All Roads Lead to the South, we launched our Reclaim Your Vote campaign earlier this year that engages voters nationwide through door knocking, text outreach, phone banking, events, and grassroots mobilization. And we're especially focused on registering college students to vote, seeing all the harms and the ways that this administration and state governments have tried to take away campus voting. Ahead of our annual conference, this year is going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. We will be partnering with organizations like Win with Black Men and other civil rights leaders to encourage folks to get involved in what we're calling this Summer of Freedom. So we're really excited to be here, really excited to engage in the conversation. It's so timely. So happy to pass it back to you, Renee, and keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Blake. Senator Neal, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be on here. So glad to be invited. Thank you, Congressman Horsford, for wanting to add my voice to this conversation. You know, what's going on right now, as Congressman Horsford said, even though there is complete destruction that's happening in the South in terms of voting rights, it does matter to Nevadans because the coalescence of issues always finds its way west. And we have to be clear about how we are going to be a part of this reformation of government and how we're also going to be supporting other states, not only standing for Nevadans, but also making sure that whatever political power that we have, that we're also using that to advance the southern states that are under attack, right? So as a chair of the Nevada Black Legislative Caucus, a member of the National Black Legislative Caucus, I think these are clear conversations that we need to be having about how do we support, how do we help you organize, how do we help fuel movements around what's going on, because this isn't the first time. It's just the first time this particular generation has experienced racism through the electoral process. And I think it's super important for us to remember, as you know, Congressman Horsford said it best, right? You can be angry, but you should be focused on what the solution is, right? This isn't the last time they've tried to take Black voters out. They did it in the Reconstruction period when they decided they wanted to shift all of the maps and completely suppress Black votes. They use voter intimidation, they use violence, they stuff the ballot box, they use all of the tools that are in play right now in 2026. So we should take a page out of history, educate ourselves on how we mitigated that moment in time in history and Reconstruction when we had Black leadership and it was being moved out of Congress, moved out of state houses, and then think about how we need to get back into play, because it wasn't just Blacks who were fighting. There were multiple groups fighting together for the kind of America that they wanted to see. And it'd be the same thing for fighting for the kind of Nevada that we all would like to keep. And thank you.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder for the attendees in here, go ahead and submit your questions using the Q&A function that you see, and we will get to those questions after we have our roundtable talk with our panelists. We really want to get you all involved and to be able to answer any questions that any of you may have. So please do not stay silent during this panel conversation. We really want to get to you as well. Okay, we're going to move on to Khalil, your opening remarks.
I'll make mine brief, but thank you, Renee, and thank you, Congressman Horsford. Good to be in the ice cold room with you, for those that get that reference. And happy for my big brother, Mark, who's down in New Orleans doing the great work down there. I'm excited to be in this room and to be a part of a conversation this evening. I'm going to try to break it down into just the 3 points for folks to take away and think about. So Memorial Day just passed. Got to spend time with my family, my brother, my mom, and my dad. My amazing 9-year-old CEO. She hates that I keep referring her to that in a lot of these conversations. But I was reflecting on my grandfather who served in the Navy, and what this moment could mean for him, what this meant for my parents, and realizing that the Voting Rights Act is only 61 years old. Now, for many of you who might still be in the streets or going out to the club or partying, you consider yourself young at 61. So imagine what that means for a Voting Rights Act that's only 61 years old, that's now being told it needs to be reversed. I imagine that my daughter now has less rights than her mother does. That she now grows up in a world where she had to worry about her classmates returning to school this past school year because of ICE being here in Washington, D.C. Federal troops being on. We no longer do it, but she passes by federal troops when we go to the grocery store because they still walk the streets of DC. So this is a monumental moment. I know it can seem like the way in which we're being whack-a-moled every single day for a new thing. There was increased engagement in fighting in Iran just today. We've had 2 assassination attempts against the 47th president. Imagine what that means to a young populace who is engaging in trying to take in this information, especially to Black men, which we here at Win with Black Men are trying to do, to figure out how we motivate more of us to be more civically engaged in our communities. And it's not apathy. They are literally just looking for someone, and I'm sure they find that person in Congressman Horsford in Nevada. But if you're looking for the meaning and the reason to show up, the statement of that, if you're not deciding what's on the menu, you are a part of the menu. And so we are hoping that many of you here in Nevada or who are watching this conversation around the country right now realize that it's not just in the South. While we see amazing opportunities for engagement, unfortunately having to happen because of what happened after Louisiana versus Calais on May 5th, we are seeing, as of 3 p.m. today, 44,600 people had early voted in South Carolina alone in one day. I want also to realize that labor is not necessarily in the South. A lot of these southern states are right to work states. We're seeing in Washington state, a Democratic basin is thinking to redo their map so they can stay now in compliance with what they're hearing from the Supreme Court. So this isn't just a Southern issue. This is a national crisis that we are dealing with. And we are asking not only Black men, but especially Black men from our work, but every American to realize 61 is still young. This isn't something that needs to be reversed today or tomorrow. And imagine what your kids, your grandkids are going to call out and ask for you 61 years from now if you didn't take the time to stand up and be heard and be counted. Renee, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your opening remarks. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our question flow. I'm going to give each of you about 2 minutes to answer some of the questions that we have. We want to be able to give our viewers who are watching some time to ask questions as well, so that we don't take too much of everyone's time, but also give them the information they need. So we're going to dive right in. Blake, I'm going to start with you. Why does redistricting matter to everyday people who may not think this impacts them?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, clearly, I think we all agree that the push to redistrict is clearly targeting Black communities first. But I think Khalil kind of already said this, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Um, if you don't have a meaningful way to weigh in on who represents you, I mean, first it starts with Black communities, and then this kind of redistricting race to the bottom, less and less people will have a say in who represents them. And when you have less of a say is who's in office or politicians are choosing their voters instead of the other way around, it gets harder to conduct accountability, and corruption becomes easier. And then politicians will be less responsive to the communities and the constituents they're supposed to represent, and then a little bit more responsive to their donors because they're not seeing any consequences, any type of accountability. So really we see Black communities being like kind of canary in the coal mine, but as states across the country are looking at how to redistrict and make their state more of a one-party state, that's bad for all of us. It's bad for accountability, and it's bad for the kind of democracy that we all have been working towards.
Absolutely. Congressman Horsford, I'm going to turn it over to you. Historically, we have voting rights always have been connected to economic and political power. Can you tell us why?
Well, the vote has never just been about the ballot. It's always been about who controls resources, who controls investments, whether they get made or not, and even more so, who even decides where opportunity can happen, and for what communities and for what people. When the Voting Rights Act passed, Black candidates won seats. I believe the statistics I heard was before the Voting Rights Act, there were only 75 Black elected officials nationwide across all of government. After the VRA, that got up to 10,000. And now today, or 1,500, excuse me, after the VRA, immediately. And now today we have over 10,000 Black elected officials serving in the local, state, and federal level. And these leaders deliver for everyone they represent. I'm the first African American to represent Nevada's 4th district, but my district is diverse, and I represent everyone: rural, urban, Black, white, Latino, Asian, and it's the district that I'm proud to represent. But that's the diversity of Nevada. That diversity isn't reflected the same way everywhere. But I get to make decisions on federal dollars for all of these communities, where infrastructure investments get made, whether or not we have funding for our Title I schools, and obviously a big focus on healthcare, which is something I know several people have already commented on in the chat. That is why we fought so hard to win these seats, and why there are forces fighting hard to take it away. But I ask this question all the time. If our votes weren't so important, why would they make it so hard to suppress? And until somebody can answer that question for me, then it's the obvious thing that they're attacking. They're attacking the people and their power. Black purchasing power is also significant here. Black purchasing power is projected to hit $1.7 trillion by 2030. That's trillion with the T. And we're not under attack because we're weak. We're being attacked because we're powerful. And there are forces that know it. Because here's what I want America to understand. Closing the wealth gap is not only a justice issue, it's an economic opportunity for this entire country. And the racial gap is even wider. I've worked with organizations like McKinsey, which found that closing the racial wealth gap could grow the US GDP by 4 to 6% by 2028. That would mean an additional $1.5 trillion in new economic output. That's for everyone. That's not just for Black families. That's for everyone in America. That means more homeowners. That means more small businesses. It means people contributing more through taxes in local, state, and federal level. So a stronger, broader middle class, one where people can actually thrive and not just survive. That, to me, is what inclusion looks like. Suppressing the vote does not create prosperity for anyone. It actually does the opposite. But that is why this conversation is so important, and why we need everyone's voice to be heard, and for people to understand that they do have power in this moment. They just have to use it.
Very good, very good. Khalil, we're going to turn it over to you. We do have some questions coming in, so keep those coming in. We will get to those in just a moment. I really want to ask the panelists these really important questions. We will not leave you out. I already see some coming in, so we'll get to those in just a moment. Khalil, why is organizing Black men and young voters especially important right now?
Well, I think it's always important. I mean, like, we want to make sure that every voter makes sure that gets their voices heard. We can go back to the reasons, which I think they are salient, but I know sometimes it's missed for many. But I remember watching, and I know I'm dating myself here, watching Eyes on the Prize with my dad and my mom in our living room, my brother and my sister, and realizing these moments that so many fought, bled, died, and were beaten for. But if that doesn't appeal to your greater sense of civic duty, maybe it's the Constitution that's why you should get up, because enshrined in this document is to give us each and every single one of us as American 250 years after this experiment in democracy. And I know sometimes it can feel like it's not living up to its greatest ethos, but even if that doesn't inspire you, let's bring it back to something that is really salient to you as hopefully a Black man in your community, or just someone in your community. This is important because, as Congressman Horsford was saying, what we got out of the Voting Rights Act was Medicare. What we got out of the Voting Rights Act was the Great Society, was having different voices being allowed to speak in Congress and being able to advocate for their communities so that a better America could provide for all of its citizens. So yes, I am very much making sure that we can turn out and register and engage as many Black men as we possibly can. But I want you to understand that this is about what it means for you when you wake up and you walk out of your door, that you have representation, that then you have economic decisions made in your community. So if you are concerned about a shovel for a project going in the ground, you want to make sure you're advocating to an elected official who you decided for, who you have chosen, who you've gone through the job application of seeing where they are on the ballot and voting for them. And then you can advocate to them well before the shovel goes in the ground for whatever project that may be. That could be a new grocery store that we find too often are not there in Black communities, but we need Black representation to make sure that they are. It could be for a bike lane that is going past your church that you're either for or you're against, but you need to advocate to that elected official who will then hear you. I think Blake said it best, that in these gerrymandered districts, you're not going to have the same level of access because they just don't need to listen to you. They know where their votes are, and because they've diluted you to the point of where your vote no longer matters, they can listen to their donors and then listen to the pockets that turn out and vote for them in larger numbers. So you really need to see it. We know that Black male Nevadans make up about 9.4 to 11% of the population. What if a majority of that 11% turned out and vote in this election? I'm sure Congressman Horsford would be very excited to make sure all of you could come out and vote in this election. But the goal here is to make sure you relate this to a very specific reason for why this matters to you. Again, I look at my daughter and want to make sure I'm doing every single thing I can to make her day and her life better than it was the day before. Back to you, Renee.
Thank you so much. That was great. So, as we continue to move along in these questions, I know we're going a little fast right now. I would love to give my 2 cents on some of your answers because I absolutely agree and want to give more context to a lot of them. But you guys are hitting all of your answers on the mark, and we really appreciate it. Senator Neal, I'm going to ask you this question, but we do have a viewer question that really aligns with what I'm going to ask you. So here's my question, and then we'll kind of go into the question from one of our viewers. So Nevada is one of the most diverse states in the country. What concerns you the most about the national attacks on voting rights and fair representation, and why should Nevada families pay attention to what's happening across the South?
Thank you for that question. I think what bothers me the most is that it's a walk backwards. And I feel we have a particular generation that doesn't know how to fight for what's on deck, right? We're reshuffling the cards of who has access and who has rights in real time, right? And I don't think they understand the magnitude of what it means when Representative Clyburn is being removed from a seat that is the only seat that represents an African-American person. And if that was to come to Nevada, what would that mean? I think that our responsibility and our role is to help Nevadans understand that as they were in this electoral conversation since 2020, right? Where they're caught up in this narrative of make America great again, and were sold a belief that somehow they were an integral part of reshaping what America was going to look like, or reshaping what Nevada was going to look like. That now they have their answer, which is the reshaping of Nevada, the reshaping of America does not include you. They are not interested in having you in that conversation, at the table, at the ballot box, none of the above. And so while you were sold this dream that somehow America was failing you, now you have to ask and answer the question, America's trying to remove you from that conversation. And I think it's about making it plain, making it really simple to voters, saying, you actually have to fight in a way in which you understand the problem, right? So we've already established that your vote gets you access to services, gets you access to healthcare. The question is, what is the issue that will turn the dime for you to say, absolutely not? This is the moment, this is the time where I swear to you, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that I'm at the table. And I think that issue is different for different genders, different people within Nevada. But I think our responsibility is to capture that language and to retell it back to them so that they can be activated in their spirit to say, I need to get in this game rather than sit out of that game. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to tie in one of our questions, Doretha Ross says, hypothetically speaking, let's say what's going on in the South happens here in Nevada. Based on what you're saying, what would be the strategy to stop them from trying to take away representation for Black and Brown communities here in Nevada? Senator Neal.
So thank you for that question. So if we had a gerrymandered map, right? Number one, the legislature would have to be called into special session by the governor. That is the signal point that, number one, you need to not only participate, but be in the building for what happens. You need to also be willing to gather your people in order to testify the same way they were doing in Louisiana, speak that truth, go into the streets and actually gather folks to actually be at the table to fight against those maps. You have to be willing to say when ACLU comes to the table or NAACP, you have to be willing to give those dollars so that the attorneys can actually go out and fight those cases in Nevada, or the single case that would be illustrated if that were to happen in Nevada. You would have to be able to move every cousin, nephew, auntie that you know in order to come to the table to say, listen, we are not going to be disenfranchised. We are not going to be removed. And that you would have to use it the same way you use your voter base now, which is the caravan to the ballot box. You would take that caravan to the legislature to fight against any map. If Lombardo was bold enough to pull that kind of stunt, then we would set the deck to help you fight against him. And the legislature would be there right with you.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to turn it now to our creators, Tim and Tamika. Short answers here. We are limited time, so I'm going to ask both of you, and you guys can chime in for about a minute. What roles do digital platforms and creators play in civic education and combined misinformation? Tim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys bringing creators into the conversation as well. But I think we play a tremendous role, because the reality is that a lot of people are getting their news in very short clips at this point, 30, 60, 90 seconds. And so we have the ability to amplify that stuff and make sure it gets out in front of different and diverse audiences. And I think for me in particular, I want to make sure that people who look like me and sound like me understand the implications of these racist gerrymanders, which do affect their lives on a daily basis. And so sometimes you need somebody that looks and sounds like you before you like really understand something. So we here at Find Out Media and others want to make sure that we're getting those messages out to people so that they understand that when you take the voices away from Black Americans, you make it harder for universal health care. You make it harder to fight climate change. You make it harder to do all sorts of things that people are desperately looking for, lowering prices, all of that. So working with people like us, we can get those messages out broader and hopefully change hearts and minds in the process.
Thank you. Tamika.
Wonderful. I want to say once again, and I guess I can kind of echo a lot of what he said. Thank you for including us in this very important discussion. I recognize that a lot of people don't understand the impact that is actually happening, because a lot of them are like, well, it's not in my state, so it doesn't matter. But if it's happening in one state, it can completely happen in your state and it will affect you. So we got to take action before it even gets to that point. And why I think the messaging behind digital creators is so important is because our role is really to connect the dots, right? You know, I always tell people that my goal is to connect the dots between where you're traveling, what you're wearing, how you're feeling, and really what's happening in the world around you. And a lot of people who are getting news in these small, short clips from here, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and all of that, they don't want to digest all the things that is happening in the news, because sometimes it's very heavy. So we try to present it in a way that is a lot more understandable, that maybe they can then go back and kind of reflect on what's happening. So I hope that that is what we will continue to do. So thank you once again for including us in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you for joining us. Same question goes to you. 1 minute for us, please. What roles do digital platforms and creators play in civil education and combating or combining misinformation that we see online every day?
Thank you so much. And again, to echo what Tamika and Tim said, thank you for including digital creators in this conversation. I think it's incredibly important because we're meeting people where they are right now. A lot of people have, and understandably, a sort of distrust and mistrust of mainstream media. They don't feel seen by it. They don't feel echoed in the sentiments that they're hearing. And that's where digital creators and content creators come in, because we're living real experiences. I'm a single mom in New Jersey of 2 kids, 13 and 16, and I can talk about how these things actually impact me or might impact me. You know, Khalil was talking about his daughter. My daughter, my son, they're my why. And when I convey that to my audience in a way that really resonates with their lived experience, these things hit differently. They don't seem like esoteric hypotheticals. They seem like things that can happen to them right now, tomorrow. We're already seeing this. Khalil said about his daughter. My daughter has fewer rights than I did at her age. She's 13. I don't want to leave my kids, that legacy behind. And when you talk to people and you convey these messages in this way, in this lived experience way, it actually, storytelling and those kinds of messages make a big, big difference and a bigger impact than any mainstream media newscast ever could.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off of my fellow content creators, again, my name is Renee Summerhour Brown. I was a journalist for 12 years, turned content strategist. And I tell my, future content creators the same thing, how being unique, not just about your following, but being unique in storytelling is really going to get you far in this digital world. And I think really bringing it back to home is, and reflecting your own lives to those who can relate to you, especially when it comes to these topics, are really going to hit your viewers in a different way than trying to sell them something or trying to create those hypotheticals. And so I really appreciate our creators kind of bringing that to the table. I think that's really important in how we engage with our respective audiences. So lastly, this is a group question, but I'm going to give it to Congressman Horsford to kind of wrap this thing up for us. What is at stake if people disengage from this conversation gearing into midterms?
Well, the consequence is we lose, not just the election. We lose on the issues that matter to people. And we lose a sense of the people deciding who their leaders are and not the other way around where the leaders pick who their voters are. That is what is at stake right now. I know some of these members whose districts are under attack very well. And I've said, this is bigger than any one of them because it goes to who the people are that are going to be denied if their voice is diluted in such a way that they don't get to pick their representatives in a fair and equal way. And, I'm proud that we have a citizen legislature here, women-led legislature, majority women-led legislature. I'm proud that Nevada has the diversity that it has. And look, we're not going to win every election. But that doesn't mean that the rules of the game should be changed in such a way to where the people don't get to ultimately decide. And that is what I fear the most in this moment. But what gives me hope is that the people also are not going to allow that to happen. Now, that means we've got to do the work to inform and to organize and to make sure people know what they can do, that we do have agency in this, that it is not hopeless. And that is why this is such an important conversation. And look, it's awesome to have the creators on. I want to thank Sydney Stewart, who's my new media director, and my comms team, because we are being intentional, because none of these conversations should be happening in a vacuum. And as you've all said, people have lost trust in our mainstream media and information sources. And you all have very authentic ways to reach people where they are. You have audiences that I wish I had access to, and the ability to have conversations about voting rights and equal representation, as we should about a lot of other issues, can only be grounded if you participate. So that's what we're accomplishing here tonight, and it makes me feel really good that we're doing it.
Thank you so much. That's going to do it for this conversation about voting and redistricting and being heard and who this affects. I want to thank our viewers for coming in. I want to thank those of you who had questions to ask. Again, get involved, get engaged. If like Congressman Horsford said, it's one thing to complain, it's another thing to get active. As they say, it's time to lock in, right? We got to get involved if we want some changes to happen. So I appreciate everyone who took the time tonight to, even if you didn't ask a question, just to hear what these important panelists had to say, because this is a form of getting engaged and getting involved, being informed. And now it's time for you all to do some of the work yourself. So let's start doing the research, let's start looking at our local candidates, and let's start really thinking about how all the things that are happening, even if they're not happening in your state, like they said, this is a real possibility that it might. And so let's not wait until it happens. Let's try to get to it before that. So again, I want to thank Blake, Joanne, Khalil, Congressman Horsford, Senator Neal, Mr. Fullerton, Tim, Tamika, the comms team. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. Thank you
All
for
right,
joining.
take care. Bye-bye.